Canadian real estate prices are up 20.6% compared to what they were last year. And while the market still continues to rise, I think at this point we can call it cooked. The major run-ups in housing prices are probably over at this point. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about the crazies that are talking about a 24% price reduction in housing prices. Yes, that's right, Oxford Economics kind of reminds me a little bit of this, going back to May of 2020 when CMHC predicted that housing prices were going to fall by 18%. But we're going to discuss their predictions. We're going to discuss the Canadian market, and for the first time ever, every single market across Canada. And I'm going to talk specifically about why people who make market predictions where they predict that a market is going to crash, it doesn't matter if it's real estate or something else, are very often wrong, and what you should do with their data, because it is relevant data, even though they're probably not going to be correct, but what you should be doing with their data to prepare for the future for yourself. And this is going to be really interesting at the end when we talk about this 24% price reduction prediction that Oxford Economics has. I think you're going to want to stay till the end for that, because it is going to be one of the most intriguing conversations we've ever had on this channel. But before we get into all the information, do me that favor, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget, we've got that race to 25,000 subscribers. We're almost there. And when we get to 25,000 subscribers, we're going to give away $5,000. But you have to be subscribed to win, and you have to stay tuned to this channel to find out exactly what you have to do to enter that contest. So go ahead and click that notification bell to make sure that you don't miss it. Okay, so let's get into it. I want to start by showing you the Canadian residential home price graph going back to about 2006. This is a really interesting graph from the perspective of it shows housing values going back quite a significant amount of time. And the reason I want to point this out is because I want to point out first and foremost what the last 2 years has looked like, because it has been absolutely absurd. We have seen housing prices on average go from about $500,000 up to over $800,000. So that's more than a 50% increase in housing prices in a 2-year period, which is nuts. But it's important to note here, and I'm going to point this out because it's really important to note, is that if you took GTA and Greater Vancouver area out of this chart, then housing prices, the average housing price in Canada is about $178,000 less than what it is with those two markets included. So what that means is that as a general rule, most of Canada is still affordable from a real estate perspective, but in Toronto and Vancouver, we clearly have supply problems. And what that means is that those two markets have supply issues that lead to higher prices and a really tough real estate market to get into. But for the most of Canada, be careful of what you read in the news, be careful of the sentiment that you're taking in, because for most of Canada, it is still reasonable to purchase a house for an average family. And that is the case across the country, unless you're in one of those two crazy markets. And if you're in one of those two crazy markets, yes, you have options. You can move to suburbs, you can leave the market entirely, go to different cities. I know it's tough for some who are stuck in there if you have a job that isn't mobile, but for most of Canadians, you have to realize that the problem isn't significant. Yes, it sucks. Prices on everything are going up, but for most people in the country, it is still reasonable to buy and own a home. So know that, just know that. Now, I want to show you something really interesting that I found on the Canadian Real Estate Association's website here. This is the national price map. Now, I had not seen this before. I have no idea how long this has been here. If it's been here for quite some time, I missed it, but I love this map because it makes my life really easy when it comes to doing the national Canadian real estate update, because for the first time ever, we're going to be able to talk about every single market in Canada. And I am going to put it out there to you. Where should we start? Should we start on the east or the west? I'm hearing east. Let's start from the east. Okay, so this is really cool. You can pull up this, you can compare areas. You can see that year over year, the price change in Canada has been about 20.6%. If I wanted to pull up a market like, I don't know, let's say Manitoba, I can pull up Brandon. It'll show me that Brandon's housing prices are down 6.5%. Not sure what's happening in Brandon, but you know, a really interesting tool to look at year over year housing prices. Now, what I really love about this is you can go and you can hover over the areas you want to look at. So let's say I want to look at PEI. I can see that in the last year, their housing prices have gone from 260 up to 322. And then if I want to move over here to Newfoundland and Labrador, 289 up to 324. If I want to go over here and take a look at Nova Scotia, 271 up to 367. Moving into Quebec, 421 to 498. I'm actually surprised that Quebec's numbers aren't higher here, but really interesting data there. And then you get into places like Ontario, where it goes from 863 up to 1,086,000. Manitoba, 318 up to 363. These prairie provinces will probably tend to lag a little bit behind BC and Ontario, largely due to economic factors like oil prices. Although when the economy starts to slow down and oil prices continue to be high, these markets will do a lot of catching up. We go into Saskatchewan, you've got 274 in 2021 up to 284, so not a big increase there. We're starting to see big increases in Alberta, especially in Edmonton and Calgary, up from $417 to $482,000. This is probably one of the crazier markets in the country right now because all of those things that have happened in Ontario and BC didn't happen necessarily in Calgary or Edmonton because oil prices were down over the last couple of years. But as they rise, especially with Ukraine crisis and Russia and everything that's going on in the east there, we are seeing all of a sudden the housing market boom because we have higher oil prices, and that means more money in the Alberta economy. And then in BC, you're seeing 887 in 2021 up to 1,104. Now keep in mind that these are provincial numbers, not city numbers, but they paint a really interesting picture because if you look at British Columbia and Ontario, we're basically at $1 million, but I hope you've noticed that everywhere else in Canada, we're still pretty much under $500,000 for an average home price. And if you go up in the Northwest Territories, this one I find really interesting, almost $500,000 for a house in the Northwest Territories. I had no idea the real estate values were this high. If you get into the Yukon, same sort of thing. I'd really be interested in why these prices are so high. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's higher building costs. No idea, but really interesting tool. If you want to go to CREA, search National Price Map, really a really amazing tool here for those of you who want to look into it. So housing prices across Canada up. I think we can say with reasonable certainty that the major run-ups are done, especially as we face higher interest rates. But this is where we start to see things get really interesting because we saw a report out of Oxford Economics this week where the bubble is about to burst. Canadian home prices predicted to fall by 24%. This is a big number. And they're citing a few things here. They're citing a slowdown in the economy. They're citing higher interest rates. But basically what they're saying is that the affordability in Canada is at an all-time high. This is their housing affordability index. And what they're saying is that things have pretty much hit the max of where they can go, and they're expecting it to come down quite substantially. Now, this is a really interesting conversation to be had because here's the reality of it. Is most people who predict real estate market crashes, most people who predict stock market crashes are pretty much always wrong. There's such a small percentage of people who get this right that it rounds basically to zero. Now, you talk about the 2007-2008 mortgage crisis in the US and you go, yeah, there's a whole bunch of guys that predicted that that was going to happen. And there was a movie made about it called The Big Short. Well, the reality of it is there was like 5 or 6 people that predicted it was going to happen. And for the most part, that rounds to zero when you look at the number of people who are actually watching that market. Very rarely does somebody predict a market crash accurately. And this has been true since I got into the industry. In fact, there's one commentator in Canada, I'm not going to name him because I don't want to push people to his site, but there's one commentator who has been predicting a housing market crash in Canada since the day I got into the industry. And he still writes every day on his blog about how it's going to zero, and he's never been right. Eventually he will, because if he sticks to that line of thinking, eventually it's going to be right. But the reality of it is you can't predict that a housing market or a market is going to crash because, well, the Oxford economics data is probably accurate from the perspective of looking at higher interest rates and how that will affect the market and what it should do. It's never the things that we expect that crash a market. Think about 2007, 2008. Nobody expected that basically the entire market was going to collapse. And it's very rare that people pinpoint exactly when a market will crash or even why a market will crash. It's almost impossible to do. It's almost impossible to say, it's going to go down by this much and it's going to go down because of this, because it's almost always something that completely surprises us that crashes the market. Like think about Russia and Ukraine right now. That was something that we didn't expect. That caused oil prices to go through the roof, which is going to cause inflation to go up substantially, which means that the market is probably going to, if it ends up in a recession, be there because of something that we never predicted would happen in 2020 or 2021 when we were talking about inflation and the long-term outlook. So Oxford can run these numbers all they want. They can say, okay, we're going to predict it's going to drop by 24%, but for the most part, they're probably going to be wrong. In fact, what will happen is if everything stays about the same and interest rates just go up, well, what we'll probably see is the market flatline for quite a while, but the chances of it going down substantially are probably slim to none. Now, how this information can be useful though, is if we think about it from the perspective of here is our worst case scenario. Here's the potential downside. So let's say something does happen that we aren't expecting to the Canadian real estate market. Let's say something happens in the GTA or in Vancouver and those markets start to fall. Well, what I would use Oxford's data for is basically as a representation of what I might expect if something unexpected happened. So let's say something came out of left field and crashed the Vancouver and the GTA market. Well, then I might expect that 24% would be what I should expect with respect to how much prices fall. So this, in my opinion, is the downside risk in real estate, but the things that they're using to predict that this will happen, I don't think will come to fruition necessarily. Now, could there be a downturn as interest rates start to rise? Well, yes, because every 1% increase in interest rates is going to be about a 10% headwind to real estate values. So in other words, 1% increase in interest rates affects affordability by about 10%. So therefore, if interest rates go up by 2%, then we're going to have about a 20% headwind in the market. But there are likely going to be things in the market that prop up the market, like higher inflation and higher wages, which therefore allow people to continue to buy about the same level of home, even in the face of higher interest rates and higher inflation. So, it's going to be a really interesting couple of years. I think we can put any predictions about the housing market going up substantially more to rest. That's probably not going to happen, but any sort of market crash, market decline predictions, I think are also equally less likely to happen. They might get it just a little bit right with a little bit of housing price decreases. But at the end of the day, this rings a lot like that CMHC report of 18% declines in housing prices back in May of 2020, which was absolutely wrong and not even close. Because what we learned back then was that it's really hard to predict the downside of the market. And quite often when we do, the housing market continues to climb and climb and climb. So, if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. Don't forget about that race to 25,000 subscribers. And we'll see you on the very next one.